I stumbled upon terrifying secrets in the deep woods of America, and I can't escape. I never should have opened that door. It felt foolish, reckless. Yet, curiosity gnawed at me. Each step deeper into the woods felt like a descent into madness. The air turned cold, and the branches twisted like gnarled fingers reaching for me. I walked my usual trail, surrounded by the familiar whisper of leaves, the crunch of twigs underfoot, and the heavy silence that loomed, thick and suffocating, but something was off. The shadows shifted against the trees, darker than the night itself. I could almost hear the woods breathing, a low, haunting sigh that sent chills down my spine. My heart raced. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it was just my imagination. I had hiked these woods countless times, but this night was different. A wave of dread washed over me, then came the noises rustling, almost like whispers. I paused, straining to hear over the pounding in my chest. The sound danced around me, wrapping itself in layers of eerie silence. I called out, "Hello." My voice cracked, swallowed by the darkness. No answer. Just the soft rustle that felt like a warning, a promise of something lurking just beyond my reach that I pressed on, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The air felt heavy, thick with secrets. And then I saw a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. My pulse quickened. Was it just a deer? Or something darker, something that no one was meant to find? A sudden chill swept over me, not the cold of the night, but a deeper fear prickling at my skin, raising the hair on the back of my neck that I quickened my pace, heart thumping violently now. Shadows danced around me, full of life and menace. And then it happened, a branch snapped behind me, loud and sudden. I spun around, breath hitching as the world seemed to grow darker, more suffocating. I was not alone. I could feel it, the presence lurking just beyond the trees, watching, waiting. The air crackled with tension, and in that moment, I knew I had to escape. I turned to run, but then I heard it, a low growl, deeper than the night, vibrating in the core of the earth. Panic surged through me. I stumbled. My foot caught on a root, and I fell hard, the ground biting into my knees. As I looked up, there it was, a figure emerging from the shadows, its eyes gleaming like coals in the darkness. My scream died in my throat. "Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The figure before me began to solidify, its shape twisting and shifting, woven from the shadow's fabric itself. I gasped, scrambling backward, my fingers clawing at the damp earth for purchase. The eyes, red and glowing, bore into my soul, a malevolent hunger radiating from their depths. Fear had morphed into raw instinct, and with every ragged breath I took, the malevolence surrounding me intensified. "Help me, please." I wanted to scream, but the words stuck like tar in my throat. Instead, only a shallow whimper escaped me as the creature took a step closer, an ominous glide that seemed both fluid and deliberate. The air shimmered with a palpable energy, and I could feel the very weight of its presence pressing down on me, suffocating me. Just as I thought it might lunge, a cacophony of whispers enveloped the clearing, echoing my deepest fears. "You shouldn't have opened the door," they hissed, their tones twisted, slithering around me like serpents. The more I listened, the more the syllables formed into coherent phrases. "We are bound to this place. We feel your curiosity, your darkness, and it feeds us." I inched backward, my pulse racing, but the ground was slick with fallen leaves and dirt, the shadows twisting into treacherous roots ready to trip me at any moment. "What do you want?" I croaked, my courage wavering with each step. "Your light," one voice rasped, this time distinct and chilling. The figure took another step, and I felt a deep, tremorous pulse from the earth beneath me, as if the forest itself was malevolent, conspiring against my escape. "Your light will awaken the others." There was no time to ponder what this meant. Adrenaline surged as I bolted up, swerving back down the path I had come, branches clawing at my clothes, tearing into my skin with sharp, hungry fingers. I ran. The whispers faded as I pounded against the earth, but my heartbeat thundered, a taunting drumbeat echoing the sinister laughter I imagined in the trees, but the forest was a labyrinth. The path ahead was obscured, twisting into an unfamiliar terrain as if the very landscape conspired to trap me. The trees loomed, taller than before, their twisted forms obscuring the sky and stretching into incomprehensible darkness. I fought against the impulse to cry out, fearing that any sound might summon that dreadful figure back to me. Then, I stumbled upon a clearing, a place I had never seen before. A circle of stone stood at its heart, ancient carvings glimmering in the dim light, a language long forgotten, draped in moss and shadow. An unsettling hum vibrated from the stones, resonating deep within my bones, beckoning, tempting. For a brief moment, I considered turning back, but it was too late. The ground behind me felt alive, shifting, as if something in the woods had noticed my stop. Suddenly, the air grew denser, thrumming with anticipation. Something was stirring in the shadows, and I spun around, eyes wide with dread. A silence fell, thick and heavy, before the ground beneath the circle gave way with a loud crack. The stones trembled, and the carved figures twisted, their eyes igniting like stars against the night. I took a step back, heart pummeling against my ribs, when a haunting moan echoed from the fissure that opened wide, sulphuric breath escaping from its depths. Figures began to crawl from the shadows, wretched, contorted forms dragging themselves forth, their movements predatory yet slow, as if relishing my fear that I had awoken something from that door the forest hungered, and now the price was my impending doom. Just as the first of the ghastly figures reached the edge of the clearing, I tore myself away, not looking back. I bolted into the deeper woods, only to hear the haunting chant of the whispers merging into a single, dreadful voice that echoed, "You should have stayed away. You will never escape." With my pulse racing and panic swirling, I became aware of a new sound, a hollow crack beneath my feet, a thin branch breaking not from behind, but ahead. I stopped dead in my tracks, terror clawing at my insides. I was no longer alone in this hollow, twisted heart of the forest. Then I heard it, my own name, dragged across the night like a plea and a curse. Your name. I turned slowly, dread coiling tightly around my heart, to find the shadows themselves taking shape, writhing and beckoning toward a darkness that was not empty but full of horrors I could barely comprehend. The figure I thought I had left behind stood at the threshold, waiting in the shadows where the light dared not reach. The forest was nightmarish, alive, and I was caught in its grasp. I realized I had awakened more than just the shadows. I had awakened the very heart of a darkness that sought nothing less than to claim me. The whispers crescendoed, weaving through the trees as if taunting me directly. Your name. Come closer, join us. They resonated with a longing that twisted in my stomach. I felt their lure like a garrote tightening around my throat, urging me toward the monstrous figure that loomed just within the veil of branches, punctuating the night with its ominous presence. No! I screamed, but the word ripped from me in a weak, horrified breath. Panic surged through my veins, and I took a tentative step back, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever horror had resurfaced from that gateway of despair. The figure shuddered, its form momentarily flickering in the dim moonlight. The glow from its eyes intensified, illuminating the grotesque features that twisted into a semblance of human emotion, an otherworldly blend of anguish and lust for something primal. It raised a skeletal hand, beckoning me, and I felt the very essence of the forest shift, the air electric with an unseen malice, as if the trees themselves hungered for my resignation. That I end my frantic retreat, I stumbled over this unseen terrain, a hidden root, a gnarled branch, and suddenly I was crashing down, the world spinning. The earth was no longer solid beneath me, fallen leaves floated like feathers, and I felt swallowed by darkness. When I came to, my breathing echoed in the hollow space around me. The air was stale, thick with the scent of decay. I tried to rise but found my hand pressed against something cold and slick. Panic clawed at my throat as I jerked back, my eyes adjusting to reveal I had fallen into a cleft of the earth, a shallow pit lined with torpid soil, slick with dampness, tinted with a sickening shade of red, and then I heard it again, my name, a soft, dripping echo that resonated within the darkness. Come to me, your name. Come join us in the eternal night. I scrambled up a little, feeling the slick walls of the pit close in on me as I struck the ground with a fervor that was beginning to flag. Every sound around me seemed to pulse with dread, the whispering chorus outside the pit, the distant rustling of leaves, and the sickening squelch of something shifting near the sides. Suddenly, the light from above flickered, and I squinted up to see the twisted forms peering over the edges. I gasped, the sight almost driving me into madness. Evidently, the shadows had multiplied, their silhouettes grotesquely eclipsing the moon. They stared down at me with hollow gazes that seemed to drink in my terror like a fine wine. They were not alone. Other figures emerged, faces shrouded in shadows but bearing the unmistakable essence of souls lost, pale, skin pulled taut over skeletal frames, mouths forming twisted smiles. Let go. Give in, they chorused in unison, the camaraderie of madness infusing their voices. Join us in seeking the shadows, feel the bliss of losing yourself. I dug my nails into the damp earth, fighting against the oppressive pull of their insidious charm. Just then, a sudden tremor surged through the pit, sending clumps of soil raining down. The fissure shifted wider, threatening to consume me entirely. I wouldn't let them envelop me. Get away. I screamed, lurching to one side and propelling myself upward. The edges of the pit crumbled beneath my fingers, and with one last desperate push, I burst through and rolled onto the forest floor, breathless and wild, but my respite was brief. The ground beneath me seemed to writhe, coaxing my senses to succumb once more. The darkness bled into my thoughts, wrapping around my brain like serpents, squeezing tighter as I pushed myself to my feet. I stumbled in the direction I hoped led to the path back home, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to flee, but still more whispers slithered into my consciousness. Your absence is noticed, your name. You must return. I broke into a sprint, branches slicing at my skin, my lungs burning. I could hear their sinister laughter entwining with the wind, a cacophony echoing through the woods that made the night feel impossibly alive. Suddenly, the ground bubbled beneath my footfalls, erupting with a shriek that resonated in the core of my being. That I dared to look back, and what I saw made my stomach turn. The forest was alive with movement, blackened figures weaving through the trees, drawing closer, dragging their twisted limbs along the underbrush. My breath quickened, adrenaline as my only ally. They were no longer hidden, they surged forth like a tide of despair, their eyes luminous in the overwhelming darkness, a unified hunger demanding fulfillment, and that when I felt it, the weight of a hand grasping my shoulder, ice cold and suffocating. I spun to face the darkness, a scream rising in my throat, but as my voice tore free, the world exploded into the relentless night, and I was swallowed whole, dragged into that sinister void brimming with untold horrors. Come embrace the darkness, your name. You will never escape. The forest closed in around me, tendrils of shadow reaching down to pull me into their embrace. I could feel my heartbeat quicken, almost crying out to me to retreat as I was shaken by the voice resounding within me, echoing from the depths of that infernal pit I'd narrowly escaped. The ground shifted beneath my feet, morphed into a treacherous path that led deeper into the darkness rather than home. Please leave me alone. I shouted into the void, my voice thin and fragile, barely louder than the rustling leaves. Yet the forest pulsated with a life of its own, swollen with malignancy. Whispers crescendoed all around, every shadow seemed to swirl and spin, a tapestry of fear. As I realized, I was no longer in control. Frantic, I stumbled along the terrain, the earth beneath me sapient, gnawing at me through roots and bramble that clawed at my ankles. I could hear them again, the voices that rose from unseen depths, the ones that craved my despair, weaving a spell of longing so deep it cracked the very essence of my willpower. Your name, we know you. Shadows curled closer, their forms solidifying in flickering glimpses, twisted visages breaking through the inky darkness. I could almost make out faces I once thought familiar, but the features were distorted, unrecognizable. They were reflections of loss, twisting and writhing, wearing garments tattered by time, faces marred by despair. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a clearing. Light flickered within a patch of lingering moonlight, oddly untouched by the horror around. It felt like a sanctuary, a reprieve amidst the malevolence. Heart pounding, I rushed toward it, driven by an instinct to seek refuge. But as I crossed into that illuminated space, dread coiled around my heart. The clearing was a mass grave, beneath my feet lay skeletons, animal and perhaps something more, intertwined with roots that ensnared their bodies like lovers caught in a morbid embrace. Their hollow eyes bore into me from the depths of decay, as if accusing me, demanding my allegiance to the darkness that had consumed them. I stumbled back, retching as my stomach twisted painfully. "Join us in the dance," one of the shadows crooned from beyond the grasp of light. A skeletal hand emerged, gracious and welcoming, beckoning with a despairing elegance. "The darkest corners offer solace, your name. You can find peace here. Embrace us." "No!" I cried, tearing my eyes from the hand and turning to escape. But the shadows surged forth again, more insistent. The air thickened, suffocating me with a weight that numbed my senses. I gasped for breath, nearly collapsing under the pressure as laughter erupted from them, a symphony of wicked joy wrapping around me. Stumbling backward, I lost my footing, collapsing into the very pit I had narrowly evaded. Darkness swirled at the edges of my vision, my limbs flailing wildly as I clawed at the earth. "Get away!" I screamed, forcing my eyes shut, aware that they were closing in, hungry to claim me, but then, from somewhere above, a voice I had almost forgotten pierced through the voices, resonating with a distinct clarity. "Run! You must run!" It was a warning, a shrill, desperate cry that sliced through the choking fog of despair that I froze for just an instant, the fractures of memory clawing at my mind, but the shadows weren't waiting. They lunged forward, and a chill coursed through my spine. I had to move. But the ground trembled violently, sending bursts of debris flying, and I felt my sanity splintering under the weight of their desperation that in one final surge, I launched myself backward, tumbling onto the forest floor, the dirt coarse against my skin. But the moment my eyes flew open, dread stole my breath. The shadows had morphed, twisting into an undulating mass that shimmered with an eldritch glow. There, at the forefront, emerged the figure I had encountered earlier, eyes burning with an infernal hunger. "Why fight, your name? Your fate is entwined with ours," it whispered, the air thick with poisons of despair and promises of oblivion. As it lunged toward me, the ground shook with a thunderous roar. I could barely process the terror unfolding when I heard a resonant crack that was followed by an eerie silence. The floor beneath me splintered, and before I could react, the earth yawned open, sucking me in as the shadows screamed in ecstatic joy. Just as darkness swallowed me whole, I heard one final whisper, chilling down to my marrow. "Awaken her," and then, an overwhelming wave of blackness ripped away all my senses. In that instant, I knew this wasn't just a battle for survival anymore, it was an awakening of something ancient and terrifying, and I was just the pawn. I clawed my way through the suffocating darkness, hands scraping against damp soil and jagged roots, desperate to find anything solid. My breath came in parched gasps, the terror of the shadows thrumming in my ears like mournful drums. "Awaken her" echoed in my mind, an incantation laden with dread. Who was she? What had they awakened? As I finally pushed myself up, the air was still alive with a sickly sweet scent that wormed its way into my instincts. I blinked, struggling to adjust my eyes in the dim light that filtered through gnarled branches overhead. Around me, the woods breathed deeply, the trees swaying as if beckoning me closer. I was no longer in the clearing. I found myself in a deeper part of the forest, a place where the moonlight barely penetrated, swallowed by the dense canopy. Suddenly, I sensed movement at the periphery of my vision. I turned sharply, heart pounding, but nothing was there, just shadows shifting, almost impatient, whispering to one another in a tongue that felt ancient and malicious. I pressed my back against the cold trunk of an immense oak, searching for some glimmer of safety or companionship within that malignancy. Illuminated by a faint, eerie glow seeping through the thick foliage, I noticed something on the ground. It was a small, carved stone no bigger than my palm, with an intricate symbol etched into its surface. As I picked it up, cold energy surged through me, a pulse vibrating in sync with the shadows. My breath caught again, a premonition cautioning me that this was not merely a talisman but an offering, a link to whatever darkness lay beyond. "I see you found one of the gifts," a voice coiled around me, shattering the silence. It was smooth and soft, yet piercing, slicing through the thick tension. I spun to meet the source, but grasped only air. The voice snickered, drowning me in unease. "You should treat it kindly, they swim in the same ichor as you. Who is there? Show yourself." I shouted, my voice echoing around me, betraying a tremor that I couldn't suppress. From the depths of the woods emerged a figure, stepping forward with an unsettling grace. She was a woman, no, a specter, gliding across the ground with feet that barely touched the earth. Her pale skin glimmered under the dimness, and her dark hair cascaded like a river of shadows over her shoulders. Her eyes, though luminous, were pools of an unfathomable depth, and within them, I saw a glimpse of eternity but also endless suffering. "Do you not feel it? The pull? The melody of your blood calling to those lost beneath the roots?" Her voice was mesmerizing, weaving in and out as if carrying an unholy hymn. "They've been waiting for you, dear child." "Who? The shadows?" I faltered, glancing nervously about, feeling their presence creeping ever closer, as if they were eager to be summoned. "Yes, they sing for you, dance within your fear. They wish to awaken what slumbers deep beneath the forest, and you are the key." With a sweep of her hand, she indicated the forest around us, where the darkness seemed to thicken, curling and writhing in anticipation. "No. I don't want any part of this," I shouted, gripping the stone tightly, the weight of its power suddenly feeling monumental. But the shadows were insistent, pulsating with life, and the woods whispered secrets that ensnared my resolve. "Lie as you will, but the truth is in your veins." She took a step closer, the air thickening with the scent of earth and damp decay. "You've sensed it, haven't you? The bond you share with the forgotten. The very essence of this cursed land flows within you." The shadows shrieked like banshees at her words, swirling and weaving in a frantic dance, their cacophony escalating into an insidious harmony. I staggered backward, caught in the thrall of a primal fear that reverberated through my bones. It was all spiraling beyond my control. Then, without warning, the ground beneath shifted, and monstrous roots burst forth, writhing like serpents, their tips sharp and seeking, eager to entrap me. I screamed and flailed, trying to escape their grasp, but the woman watched with an eerie calmness, her smile a haunting promise of inevitability. "Join them, your name, embrace your fate, the awakening is nigh," she cried, her voice rising over the ruckus. With each frantic movement, the roots lunged faster, wrapping around my ankles, pulling me toward the depths of this torturous forest. The shadows swirled tighter, voices pleading and demanding, drowning out my cries. I felt my consciousness slipping as despair seized me. This was not merely a fight for survival, but a collision with the hollow desires of ages past. Just as I teetered on the brink of surrender, a thunderous crashing filled the forest, shaking the very foundations of the world. The trees groaned under the strain, and a massive shape surged forth from the shadows, a colossal creature, birthed from the very essence of the darkness I had desperately tried to escape. It was primal and nightmarish, with leathery wings and countless eyes, each blazing with unholy fire. That I froze in horror as it turned its gaze upon me, and with a voice that vibrated through my skull, it bellowed, "You have awakened us now, witness what lies beneath." And in that moment, darkness broke over the horizon, threatening to consume everything, as I realized the forest's true secret. A horror beyond imagining was about to reveal itself. As the chill of the creature's presence enveloped me, time seemed to stretch, wrapping tightly around my pounding heart. The air thickened with an unspeakable dread while the shadows clamored as if preparing for a feast. Each breath felt labored, saturated with a sense of impending doom that was both exhilarating and paralyzing. "Witness what lies beneath," the creature's voice resonated through the trees, and suddenly, the ground began to quake. It was as if the very earth were a living entity, awakening from a long slumber. With each tremor, The roots constricting around my legs pulsed and writhed as though they, too, were reaching for something buried deep within the soil, a hunger that was not only monstrous but desperate. Desperation fueled my fight as I thrashed against the roots, but they held me fast, inviting me deeper into their cold, damp embrace. My mind screamed for clarity, for something to anchor me, but the woman's haunting laughter wove into the chaotic symphony of the night, mocking my plight as she melted further into the shadows. Then I felt it, a drip, slow and viscous, oozing from the gaps in the earth beside me. It pooled black and glistening, and as I strained to pull my eyes away, something began to surface. It was not just a creature, it was a dragging tide of faces and bodies, twisted in silence, their eyes hollow, mouths cracked open in silent screams. They were the forest's long-lost children, reanimated by the power that surged from the creature soaring above. "Look more closely," the figure said, now directly in front of me, stepping from the shadows as if she were a part of the dark tapestry. Her eyes gleamed with wicked delight. "They were abandoned, just as you will be if you do not awaken the rest." Rest? What rest? There I fought against the roots, but those eyes trapped me, drawing me closer to the truth. Their gaunt faces seemed to twist in recognition as if they knew me, knew my own darkest fears. Suddenly, a gut-wrenching realization crashed upon me, a memory, whispered through the hollow itch of intuition. A story I had heard as a child about lost souls in these woods, returning once a decade to snare another living heart into their eternal suffering. I hadn't believed it then. The thrill of adventure, of the unknown, had overshadowed whispered warnings, and yet here I was, their whispered promise transformed into my unbearable reality. "Quickly. You must choose," the spectre urged, pulling me from my reverie. She gestured towards the grotesque assembly of writhing figures craving salvation, some reaching for the sky, some clawing at one another in frantic desperation. "Will you join them, or will you assist in the resurrection? Not all can awaken, dear child. But there they are, meet for the fire. Become one with them, or condemn them to the shadows. You have the power to choose." Her eyes bore down on me, an intensity fierce enough to ignite the frail spark of hope I clung to. As the question settled, the very fabric of the forest twisted with anticipation. The creature above unfurled its shimmering wings, bathing the dark landscape in a hellish glow, and in that moment, I realized it was no longer just about survival. This was a wrestling match for my soul, one that would tip the scale between life and eternal despair. I glanced back at the faces of the lost, and some twisted, warped features flashed with a familiarity that struck like ice water through my veins. One particularly young face looked eerily like my own. My heart raced, flitting between the echoes of those lost and the sinuous whispers of the forest around me. Then, from the depths of my being, a fearsome roar erupted, a primal shout that spurred both rage and anguish, a battle cry of refusal. "I want tea!" I screamed at the shadows, turning to the woman, who merely smiled, a wicked glassy glint in her gaze as if I had already made my choice. A searing pain erupted in my chest, a sharp, threat-laden ache, and the roots tightened their grip, urging me into despair. I glanced down and saw a tangle of gnarled fingers clawing from the black ooze, grasping, clutching, longing. The shadows seemed to thrum with life, a menacing chant rising among them. Awaken her," they whispered, weaving their torment into a spell that engulfed and consumed. I could feel the pain of my own heartbeat resonate across the forest floor, as if the land itself fed upon my fear. But before I could succumb to their restless call, the creature above roared once more, and the earth ruptured in a spectacle of light and dark colliding. The shadows threw themselves upon me, surging like a wave, and in a moment of blinding brilliance, I recognized what must come next. Then, just as my resolve broke, the roots were torn away violently. I was hurled backward, and I landed hard on the damp earth, breath knocked from my lungs. Above me, the creature filled the horizon, a silhouette of fury and wrath against the night sky. "You have awakened what lies beneath," it intoned, a sentence that dripped with palpable vengeance. "And you shall pay the price." The ground erupted once again, this time with raw energy so intense I felt my bones rattle, and white-hot light blazed from the cracks as something ancient and monstrous clawed its way to the surface. Dread sank its fangs deeper into my skin, and I realized all too late that the price was not mine alone, it was meant for my flesh and blood. With a final shriek, I turned to run, aware of something dark breathing down my neck, every step a taunt from the shadows as they screamed of ages past, a prelude to a horror that was just beginning to unfold. And just as I thought I had escaped their grasp, I felt a cold hand clasp around my ankle. "Join us," they sang, and I was hurled into the depths of a nightmare that awaited just beyond the veil. The world around me twisted in frantic motion as I was dragged back toward the swirling darkness that beckoned from the embrace of ancient roots. Panic clawed at my throat, I thrashed and kicked, desperate to shake off the claustrophobic grasp of the shadows that threatened to swallow me whole. I could hear the wailing of the lost souls growing louder, mingling like a deranged choir, taunting my very existence. "Join us!" they howled, voices choked with despair and yearning. "We are stronger together. You can feel it too." Their pleas clawed at my mind, melding into the very fabric of my thoughts. It was dizzying, a cacophony of longing that promised a relief from the agony I had just endured. The cold fingers around my ankle tightened, ice seeping into my bones as they pulled. Above me, the creature loomed like a storm, its wings unfurling against the moonlight, casting grotesque shadows that danced like phantoms among the trees. I glimpsed the woman she watched with a rapture that seemed to ignite her wicked delight, as if every cry and plea from the souls below fueled her cosmic hunger. In a moment of clarity amid insanity, I clawed at the damp soil, pulling myself forward, pooling all my life force into one desperate push. My fingers dug deep, desperate to find something solid to hold on to, as tendrils of darkness sought to weave around my wrists. I could feel the surge of something primordial rise within me, a wild savagery ignited by sheer survival instinct. "No!" I screamed, wrenching my foot free from the grasp, propelled by a storm of fury and fear. I lunged forward, stumbling toward the edge of the clearing where the echoes of lost hope faded into the depths of the forest. But as I turned, the ground beneath me rippled violently, an upheaval of soil and roots as if awakening something sinister from its slumber. Then, a calamitous churning sound erupted, thrumming like a heartbeat, the rhythm of the forest itself, agitated and alive. A wave of darkness surged, and from it, the faces of the damned rose up as if molded from the very shadows I had sought to escape. Their twisted forms undulated and moaned in unison, a symphony woven from echoes of nightmares forged in the void. "Your blood calls to me," they sang in unison, and I felt it, a pull so profound it sank its claws into my heart. It was a desire, unmistakable and raw, resonating through the darkness. Suddenly, the figures stepped back, revealing a pathway forward, paved with grotesque faces turned inwards, surrounding a center where a shadowed dip pulsated, oozing darkness. "Step forth," they beckoned. With horror coursing through me, I glanced back at the creature who hovered, its eyes burning like suns, eager and relentless. It was as if I stood at the threshold of two realms, one filled with the promise of release and the other pulsing with a more unspeakable horror. Yet as I lingered, I couldn't shake the feeling that every soul within the forest was watching, urging me to succumb to the known chill of shadow rather than the fear of unknown pain. "Join them," the woman insisted, her voice slicing through the heavy air like a blade. "It's your destiny. Embrace it before it's too late." Her laughter melted into the rhythm of the chant, the forest a prison closing in on me. Was this what my childhood stories had warned of, a gradual seduction by darkness? But deep within, another part of me surged, a flickering light ignited by my survival instincts. Summoning every ounce of strength, I resisted the magnetic pull, forcing myself to step back. But with each retreating step, the shadows seemed to retreat too, only to writhe with scintillating rage when the creature responded. "Then you shall never escape." It bellowed, and the ground split open, revealing a maw of darkness, virulent and hungry. As if beckoned by an unseen force, the lost souls shrieked in a discordant melody, their faces twisting into horrific masks as they lunged towards me. The sheer terror of their desire made my skin crawl, and I sprinted away, not looking back. I could sense the creature's wrath following me, closer with every heartbeat. Branches scraped at my skin, the night air thick and suffocating. I barreled through the underbrush, my heart racing, until I stumbled upon the old well, the one my grandmother had warned me about. Breathless, I felt a pull toward its decrepit structure, an unsettling familiarity pounding in my chest. Looking down into the abyss, the shadows below beckoned like a sinister reflection of my inner turmoil. Would they accept me there, or was it another trap crafted by a darkness that thrived on despair? Join us, yes, join us. The whispers chorused, desperation mingling with the certainty that this time there would be no escape. Just then, a deafening crack rang out, the monster's arrival unmistakable, the tendrils of darkness lashing out. Out of time, I made my choice to leap, plunging into the well's depths with a shriek of terror. And as the darkness swallowed me whole, an icy hand gripped mine from below. "Welcome home," it whispered, as I felt the cold embrace of souls long lost unfold around me, tighter than any darkness I had ever known. The abyss swallowed me with greedy fervor, any shred of light disappearing above as I plummeted deeper into the heart of the well. Coldness enveloped me, a liquid darkness heavy and oppressive, as if the very essence of dread weighed down upon my chest. My thoughts spiraled into chaos, a cacophony of screams mixing with the fashion of recollections, distorting reality into unspeakable horrors. I felt the icy hand tighten around mine, and dread trailed down my spine, dispersing shivers across my flesh. I could not bear to turn my gaze downward into the fathomless darkness that surrounded me. Instead, I focused on the abyss above, desperately wishing for a glimmer of the stars, even as the whispers grew louder, more urgent, echoing through the claustrophobic void. "Join us, accept what you are," the tortured voices clamored, nodding their despair with unholy glee that pulsed like a dark rhythm through the water. It felt alive, sentient, a living reflection of my deepest fears intertwined with their agony, stirring a primal reflection within me. Thoroughly engulfed by the depths, the faces of the damned flickered into existence around me, contorted and tormented, each visage soaked in an unforgotten pain. They reached out with ghostly fingers, each one a reminder of the entwining horrors that whispered from the shadows. I recognized some of them. The faces haunted my dreams, figures from folklore that my grandmother had recounted in hushed tones, creatures said to dwell in the void, waiting for the desperate to succumb. "Why are you afraid?" one face wailed, a woman whose eyes were sunken, effervescent with a desperate craving. "No one escapes, no one survives." Her lips curled into a mournful smile, as the abyss shifted, and I swore I could feel a heartbeat thump aligning with my own. That I yanked my arm free, casting my gaze around the darkness, searching for any other way out. Panic rose like bile in my throat. I was simply treading water here, spinning in a vortex of anguish surrounded by the lost. The well's bottom was nowhere in sight, the water around me chilled as the cries became a cacophony, promising release, entreating me to let go of the light, to join in their chorus of despair. Breath pounding in my ears, I swam frantically, pulses of icy dread nudging at the edges of my resolve. It felt like the essence of childhood nightmares that had clawed their way back to life. Darkness before the dawn, the feeling of being watched by empty eyes lurking just beyond reach. Suddenly, the icy grip of the hand changed, it pulled me deeper, stronger, relentless as I fought against it. I was torn between the insatiable hunger of the shadows and the flicker of resistance struggling within. Visions of the world outside pushed against the walls of my consciousness, swirling images of my beloved grandparent in her garden singing songs that kept the darkness at bay. "Help!" I gasped, choking on the water filling my lungs as the darkness seemed to congeal around me, forming a frigid vortex. The voices surged, relentlessly unearthing ancient sorrows, twisting time, tempting me with their calls, and then, I stumbled upon something solid, an opening. My heart surged with hope. Could it lead to salvation? I clawed my way towards it, fleeing the clutch of shadow that yearned to drag me back. The opening felt impossibly small, a fleeting promise of escape that beckoned at my fingertips. With one last surge of strength, I broke through, bursting into a hollow cavern deep beneath the well. The air was still, heavy with silence broken only by the drip of water echoing eerily through the expanses. As I gasped in the damp, musty air, reality gravitated towards an unsettling clarity. Above me, the well's mouth loomed, a distant memory of hunger, but it was not the darkness that shivered my resolve. No, it was what lay before me. Forms shifted in the shadows, monstrous and feral, and there, in the center of the cavern, hovered a pulsing orb of sickening light that seemed to breathe, drawing darkness in and expelling it in waves of shifting shapes. A grotesque blend of all the faces that had called to me rose around it, their features flickering like flames engulfed by wind. "Welcome home, child," they whispered, summoning my name in a nauseating harmony. The faces twisted, melding into one distorted visage, and I wanted to scream but their collective breath washed over me, forcing silence down my throat. I stumbled backward in horror, tripping over something cold and wet. Reaching down, I realized it was not just darkness pooling around me, it was a collection of those who had come before, faces marred with resignation, reflecting the very essence of despair. Their judgmental eyes screamed by their sober narratives, and suddenly, I was seized by the urge to join them. As the orb pulsed more fiercely, the faces leaned closer, inviting me to come forward, to break the tether to the world above, and the promise it held. "Embrace it, embrace what you are," they beckoned, and for one terrifying moment, the air crackled with an intoxicating possibility that wrapped itself around my soul, but when I felt the resonance of their collective hunger thrumming in my chest, a wave of defiance surged within me. Too many spirits longed for freedom, and perhaps I could become their salvation instead, and yet, the cavern around me began to tremble, shadows coiling tighter, thrashing in violent protest as the ground beneath my feet split. The beings began to screech, their fragmented faces glimmering in terror, pulling me closer to the pulsating orb, the jaws of despair about to claim me again. Just as the cacophony erupted into chaos, the orb split open with a deafening roar, energy pushing me backward, nearly shattering my will. Screams, entreaties, desires all melded into one from the cavern walls, from the crowd of souls longing for release, from the shadows vying for dominion. I realized now this place was not merely a refuge, it was a crucible of horrors, a gathering ground for something much larger, far beyond me. As the cavern began to implode, I clawed my way toward the opening where I had emerged, but the pull of darkness around me was overwhelming, and then, a voice rose above the fray, sepulchral and powerful: "You cannot escape what you are." I turned around just in time to see the shapeless form of the original creature lingering at the entrance, its eyes ablaze with malevolence, its wings eclipsing the light entirely. Clenching my fists, I was left with a terrifying choice: to flee into the unknown or seal my fate within the damned embrace of what awaited at the heart of despair. "Flee, if you can," it taunted, stretching a shadowy hand towards me, its fingers curling into sinister spirals. And I could feel it, the dark storm brewing, the choice that would seal not only my fate but the fate of my ancestors lost in this treachery, reverberating through the deep woods, pulling everything into the silence of shadow. The walls of the cavern began to close in, the shadows sharpening into claws that reached for me, gnarled and hungry. Somehow, I found the will to back away from the pulsing orb, the sickly warmth expanding and pressing against my skin like a fever. With each pulse of light, I could see the faces twisted, restless, their gazes boring into my soul with an intensity that threatened to unravel whatever sanity remained. "Join us," they whispered in a panicked chorus, those tortured souls clawing at the edges of reality, drawing a line between my existence in the world above and the fate that awaited me beneath. I turned, desperately scrambling toward the narrow opening that had provided my escape, but the space before me shrank as if the very cavern resented the thought of my escape. The creature loomed, its form undulating in the air with a menacing grace. It was both beautiful and horrific, its skin the color of ink and light, a contradiction that sent nausea spiraling through me. As it advanced, the ground trembled, fissures snaking across the damp earth, spilling out the jagged remnants of those long lost. "Flee while you can," it crooned, voice layered with a richness that resonated in the deepest corners of my mind. "But know the truth, you were always meant to be here." Shivers danced along my spine, intertwining with horror, coaxing me into submission. I shook my head, fighting the encroaching darkness that urged me to surrender. The faces surrounded the orb shuddered, caught in an agonizing dance of allure and despair, drawing closer to the luminous heart, the amalgamation of their sufferings. "Join us, it is the only path to peace." But just as the words washed over me like a tidal wave, a memory twisted through my mind, a time long past when my grandmother spoke of the tales etched in the bark of ancient trees, how they belonged to those who had once wept in fear, who, instead of succumbing, found a way to live through their pain. What did she always say? "You can dig deeper, even when you think you're at the end. There's always more beneath the surface." And so, with a newfound defiance, I hurled myself into the shadows, toward the opening beyond the creature and the orb. I could hear the wails escalating behind me, faces stretching into grotesque howls as I squeezed through the impossibly narrow passage. The jaws of despair snapped shut behind me, a final echo of what waited on the other side. The air shifted, dragging wisps of chill that felt charged with energy. Straining my ears, I could still hear the cacophony of anguish and the mockery that thrummed in the air, but ahead, I glimpsed a faint pinprick of light. I raced toward it, heart pounding with the rhythm of panic, each step shaking loose splinters of resolve. Stumbling into another cavern, my breath hitched as I dropped to my knees, hands trembling as I pressed against the cold stone. Light spilled around me, revealing walls etched with ancient symbols, warnings and stories that seemed alive, shifting beneath the touch of my fingers. I was not free yet, something far more sinister lurked close by. In the unsettling quiet, the shadows unfurled slowly, curling up against the stalagmites with a lazy menace. I scanned the terrain, and my pulse quickened as I sensed movement at the periphery of my vision. In the distance, I made out figures barely human, their features twisted and distorted, illuminating only slightly in the wavering glow of the cave. I felt their eyes on me, watching with unholy anticipation. There were whispers again, echoing the promises of the damned that I had fled, but these were different. They bore secrets of the cavern, echoes not only of despair but latent knowledge. The price is one paid for survival in a world designed to consume the helpless. Are you brave enough to listen? One of them hissed, emerging from the darkness, its form like a shifting specter. Bravery leads to ruin or rebirth. You decide. With those words, the air thickened, too heavy to breathe, and the flickering light dimmed as the wispy shapes crowded around. A sickening dread gripped my heart. Could they be remnants of the lost souls, drawing me back into their twisted embrace once more? I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound emerged, only deafening silence, punctuated with the echoing laughter of the abyss behind me. Panic rising, desperation gripped me as I fumbled for a way to escape yet again, and then I felt a clawed hand wrapping around my ankle, dragging me over the slick rock toward the shadows. My pulse raced with an agony that resonated in the depths of my very being, screams welling in my throat as the figures lurched, their faces twisting with a frenzy that threatened to consume all light. All at once, a blinding light erupted from my palm, a piece of my grandmother's pendant, which I had somehow clutched through this living nightmare. It flared defiantly, illuminating the cavern and banishing the darkness in waves. But too late. Before I could understand what was happening, the ground quaked beneath me. Revelations swept forth from the shadows, secrets demanding to be unleashed, and I was yanked from the earth's hold, spiraling into an unfathomable abyss of whispers, my destiny woven into the very fabric of this hell. Your truth awaits, child, they sang, and as the ground split open wide, I was flung back into the darkness, my only companion the anguished cries of the lost, and in that moment, time collided, the warmth of light and the chill of the void, forcing me deeper into the uncharted terror. Would I ever find my way back, or was this the beginning of a far darker legacy tethered to my blood? As the shadows coiled tighter, I braced myself for whatever horrors lay ahead, waiting for the echoes of the abyss to resonate once more. I fell through the darkness, weightless, dizzying shades of my own memories colliding with the emotions of the damned, when suddenly, in a blink, I was there, standing in the center of the cavern again, but this time, it pulsated with a more dreadful energy, a palpable malice crawling beneath my skin. The whispering faces hovered close, manifesting desires and despair, their voices merging into a single, unholy chant. Awaken her, awaken her. I realized with horror that her was not merely someone else, it was me. As the memories began to swirl back into focus, I understood I had become their beckoning song, the promise of new life blending with the pulse of agony underfoot. The cavern walls enclosed me like a tomb, details sharpening a dark, quilted tapestry of stories echoing in the air, stories woven from ancient roots of my family's past. Once lost, forgotten tales began to braid into my thoughts, revealing a lineage cursed by the very land beneath, a bloodline that had dallied with shadow, gleaning powers it could not control, and, in their greed, awakened a horror that was meant to slumber eternally. The tendrils reached for me, grasping at my essence like a lover who had waited too long. I could see the faces they bore, my own ancestors, their expressions a terrible mixture of agony and tranquility, intertwining their fates with the forest's malignant pulse. Each spectre seemed to flicker in agony, demanding for me to remember something buried deep, something that would change everything. "Your blood tethers you to this darkness," a familiar voice echoed in my mind. It was my grandmother, warm yet ghostly. "You are the last key to set them free, your name. But freedom comes at a price." The walls began to shift, and the shadows grew restless, murmuring restlessly, "Resurrection is inevitable. Join us." Awaken her suddenly. The orb at the cavern center flared like a dying star. The beauty within it flickered with life. The agonized faces writhed, their eyes pleading, seeking salvation through my choices. They needed me, but I felt a deep-rooted rejection unfurling within me. "No. I won't be a pawn," I shouted, forcefully breaking through the chains of their whispers that sought to intertwine my mind with theirs. Desperation spurred a ferocious indignation within me, and I swayed back. Shadows twisted angrily, pulling closer, but not before I averted my gaze, focusing instead on the family stories I had almost forgotten. There's always more beneath the surface. I had heard that wisdom too many times to dismiss. It was my anchor, my lifeline. I could refute them. I could resist this sordid fate grasping toward me. With newfound clarity, I recalled the last words my grandmother had whispered before she passed away to sever this dark cycle. The chant fell from my lips like an incantation, a rallying cry against the darkness. "Your power fades, I will not embrace despair." The cavern trembled violently, echoes of anger forming waves against the cavern walls. The orb pulsed erratically, unwilling to let me go, and my ancestral shadows shrieked, a keening sound that reverberated through the depths as I watched the specters dissolve, their forms fragmenting like glass under pressure. "Foolish girl! You cannot sever the bond." The creature's voice bellowed, vibrating through every pore of my flesh, shaking the very core of my being. The shadows lashed out, furious illusions clawing at the ragged remnants of my determination. Yet, I stood tall, feeling the power of anguish twist and groan within me. I would not be their vessel. With one last surge of strength, I thrust my arm towards the orb, feeling ancestral power pouring through my veins, a pulse that resonated louder than the chants of the lost souls. The orb exploded into shards of blinding light, illuminating the cavern with its brilliance, piercing through the dark veil that had long masturbated over this forest. In that moment, everything changed. The walls shuddered, the ground quaked, and I was flung backward, a force propelling me through light so searing that it abruptly fell silent, like a shattered dream coalescing back into a form I could not comprehend. But then, as I blinked in the aftermath of the void, I found myself outside the forest, standing on the edge of the familiar path that bore my childhood, barely a breath from the home I thought I had lost forever. The trees were serene, almost beckoning me back, their leaves swaying gently as if nothing had ever happened, but deep in my veins, an echo persisted. Had I truly escaped? The realization struck me then, a chill slicing through my peace. A return would never be topsoil hard enough to forget the darkness I had resisted. I glanced back toward the shadows bleeding through the trunks, murmurs of awaken her fading back into a distant call. And there, amongst the trees, I caught a glimmer of something familiar, a lustrous pendant hanging, glistening against the sinister bark. I knew, with gut-wrenching certainty, that I had not fully escaped, I had only postponed the inevitable. The remnants of my family still lingered, a darkness always tethered to my blood. As I began to turn away, the last whisper threaded into my mind, drifting through the breeze: "You took a path away, but remember, shadows await and shadows remain, because sometimes, the darkest parts of us are the ones that never truly leave."